والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, firstly I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us not only, as generally mentioned, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to get together to learn and to learn about the religion of Allah and so on, but also the blessing of that even though I've left Kuwait now and we weren't able to finish the book, alhamdulillah, Allah has given us the opportunity to continue studying so that we can finish this book. Because many times it happens, many ulama when they travel, they sometimes they don't have the ability to finish a certain book because of the restriction on time. So what ends up happening is that the book is many a time is left without fully being explained. So alhamdulillah, Allah has given us this opportunity to finish this book. And we are now on the chapter Al-Mutlaq wal-Muqayyad. Al-Mutlaq wal-Muqayyad. Mutlaq, they've translated here as the absolute, or you could just translate it to unrestricted. Unrestricted. As for mutlaq, then that is restricted. So mutlaq is unrestricted and muqayyad is restricted. Mutlaq is unrestricted and muqayyad is restricted. Now the Sheikh, and we're just going to carry on. We've taken our introduction before, we've taken many chapters, so I'm just going to carry on without prolonging any introduction longer than it needs to be. And our lessons are 4 days. They're not as long as we had initially, because we had the whole of Friday from Asr to after Isha, and likewise on Saturday. These lessons are shorter, they're either 2 hours or 3. So inshallah, we've given you four lessons inshallah, and we should be able to finish the book within these 4 sittings bi'idhnillah. So this chapter, Al-Mutlaq wal-Muqayyad, the Shaykh starts off by saying the definition of Mutlaq is, Al-Mutlaq linguistically means the opposite of unrestricted. That's incorrect, that's a mistranslation. It means the opposite of restricted. Mutlaq is the opposite of restricted, because Mutlaq means unrestricted, so the opposite would be restricted. Even in the Arabic here, Mutlaq lughatan ضد al-Muqayyad. Muqayyad is restricted, the opposite of Muqayyad. So the linguistic meaning of Mutlaq is that it means the opposite of restricted, which is unrestricted. And technically it means whatever indicates a reality without a restriction. Now, we did quickly read this in in our last sitting, but here when we read it when we were explaining the difference between Aam and Mutlaq. Aam and Mutlaq. Now if you remember, Aam we translate as general, and Mutlaq we translate as unrestricted. Now, Aam is a word which includes everything which comes under that word. Okay? And we said the difference between Aam and Mutlaq. Mutlaq is similar in a sense that it includes everything that comes under that name. However, the ruling only applies on one of them and not on all of them. So for example, if I was to say to somebody that pay every student 10 dinar, for example. Now, let's say there are 10 students. So if this person that I've told to pay the students, he pays 9 people instead of all 10, then he has not fulfilled this command. Rather, it's obligatory upon him to pay all 10 students. So if I say pay the students and there are 10, or if I say pay all 10 students, then he has to pay all 10. But if I say to him, pay a student, now this ruling can apply on any of them. So it includes all of the students. It's not restricted to a specific student. Out of the 10, he can do the first, second, third, fourth, it doesn't matter. Okay, but the ruling, he only has to apply it to one of them. So if he applies it to the 5th one and gives money only to the 5th one, then he's fulfilled the commandment, which is to pay a student. Now in English it makes a bit more sense, because the way we translate it, we use the word all, and we use and then when it's restricted we say a, for example. So that kind of makes it a bit more easier in English. But in Arabic it can get sometimes a little bit tricky, the difference between the two. But this is the general difference between mutlaq and aam. Okay, Not the Sheikh. So if you go to the Sheikh's technical definition, he says, and technically it means what indicates a reality without a restriction. What he means is indicates a reality, meaning the reality of that word, it includes the whole meaning of that word. The reality meaning includes the whole meaning of that word without a restriction, meaning it's not restricted to a particular person or particular thing within that ruling. So that is the meaning of the Sheikh's technical definition. As in the statement of the Most High, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, the freeing of a slave. مِنْ قَبْلِ يَتَمَاسَ, before they touch one another. This word slave now, so freeing of a slave. So if you were commanded to free a slave, is it restricted to a particular type of slave? Muslim, non-Muslim, tall, short, male, female, black, white? Is it restricted? It is unrestricted. For the Tahrir Raqaba. So the ruling would apply to any slave as long as they're considered a slave. And if you free one of them, then it's fine. And it's not restricted to, it's not am, so you don't have to free all the slaves. And secondly, it's not restricted. When you say restricted, it basically narrows it down a bit more. We're gonna get to muqayyad in a second, inshallah. Now the Shaykh, he carries on. He just basically explains the definition. So he says, what is excluded from our words? What indicates a reality is a general, because it indicates the generality of something, whereas the absolute, mutlaq, indicates the absolute nature of a particular reality. Basically saying that both words do show the whole meaning. However, am applies to all of them, whereas mutlaq applies to one of them. And what is excluded from what the restricted is the unrestricted. Okay, the definition of restricted. Now, before I move on, I want to give a few more. I want to give one more example, inshallah, of one more example of mutlaq. So likewise, in the hadith of Prophet where he says, "Salli qa'iman fa in lam tastati' fa qa'idan fa in lam tastati' fa ala jamb." Pray standing up, and if you're not able to, then sit down, and if you're not able to, then upon a side. Jump. The word a is not there, but that's how we translate it into English. So literally, we would say upon side. Okay, if you when we really literal the translation. Now this side, we would say that the word side here is mutlaq. We wouldn't say am. Am means that we would have to pray on each side that we have, which we don't. Jamb is mutlaq, meaning a side, so either our right or left. So from this hadith alone, Prophet said, فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَى جَنْبٍ, if you are not able to, then upon a side. Okay, so that shows either we can do the right or we can do the left. We don't have to do both. You can do one of the two. And what's our proof for that? We say because the wording is mutlaq. The wording is mutlaq. Okay, now we move on to muqayyad. Muqayyad. The Shaykh says restricted. So muqayyad is restricted. Restricted linguistically means whatever is used to restrain a camel and the like. That's what qayd is, to restrict something. So you can so in this case, the Shaykh gave an example of restricting or controlling like a camel and so on. It basically means to restrict. And technically it means whatever shows a reality of something but with a restriction. So the difference in the definition of mutlaq and muqayyad is this part here where it says with a restriction. That's the difference. Because mutlaq was without a restriction and muqayyad is with a restriction. Such as in the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. Now, freeing a believing slave. The previous ayah, if you go back to, now the previous ayah, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مِّن قَبْلِ يَتَمَاسَّ, that is regarding the issue of al-dhihar. We talked about al-dhihar previously. Quickly we touched upon it. Al-dhihar is when it's a form of divorce that used to happen in the time of Jahiliyyah, where they would say that you are like the back of my mother. You are like the back of my mother. So that is not allowed in Islam. It's not allowed in the religion of Islam. So in that ayah, if a person was to do al-dhihar, what's the kafara? What's the expiation? You free a slave. Okay, and this is mutlaq. The next ayah, the one mentioned here in 492, this is regarding the expiation of killing somebody by mistake. Killing somebody by mistake. So if you were to kill somebody by mistake, then one of the kaffarat, obviously we're not good, like I said, we mentioned the examples of fiqh just for understanding. We don't want to go into all of the issues and all the rulings, otherwise the lessons are long as they are, otherwise they'll be even more longer. So, but what's the expiation for that? فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. So here there's a restriction to the type of slave. For freeing a believing slave, you have to be a mu'min or a Muslim. Okay, so you can't. So in this case, you can't free a disbelieving slave. You can't free a disbelieving. It has to be a believing slave. Okay, so you could see how in the previous example here the word raqaba is mutlaq, and in this case it is known as muqayyad. It is muqayyad because it has been restricted. So it's not, the ruling is no longer general for all types of slaves, but now it's been made restricted to the believers. So the Shaykh says, i.e. any believing slave. What is excluded from our word restraint is absolute, i.e. the opposite of muqayyad is mutlaq. There is one other point as well, which is that sometimes certain words, from some aspects, the same word from certain aspects can be mutlaq, and from other aspects it can be muqayyad. Okay, so words can be mutlaq and muqayyad at the same time if you really want to be really technical about it. So even the slave is mutlaq in all, it's muqayyad in terms of it being a Muslim or not. So it's muqayyad, so it has to be a believer. But it's mutlaq in all of the other characteristics. So it's mutlaq in terms of male or female, that's fine. It's mutlaq in terms of being black or white. It's mutlaq in terms of being tall or short. It's mutlaq in all of the other characteristics. So that's what some ulama also mentioned, that the same concept, depending on how you look at it, from certain aspects can be muqayyad and other aspects can be mutlaq. However, that's just something that the Usooliyin mentioned. But generally, when you're talking about this issue, you're just focusing on whether they are a believer or not. Hence, it's enough for you just to say that this is muqayyad. You don't have to go into the explanation of, it's muqayyad in this sense and it's mutlaq in these senses. It's fine just to say it is in this case muqayyad with the characteristic of iman. Now we come on to the next issue, which is acting upon a mutlaq. Acting upon the mutlaq, meaning if something mutlaq comes to you, is it obligatory to act upon it or not? So the Shaykh says, al-mutlaq text. So when you say mutlaq, we're talking about the Quran and Sunnah, must be acted upon in accordance to its apparent meaning of absoluteness, meaning unrestrictedly, until an evidence restricts it. This is for the reason that acting on the Quran and Sunnah is an obligation that must abide by what is apparent, unless other evidences or other evidence shows us otherwise. I think that's quite straightforward. That if unless so if there's a dalil and it's unrestricted, we don't say we wait for or something to restrict it. No, we act upon it. And what we benefit from this as well is that if somebody was to come along and say that no, this ruling is not mutlaq, it's muqayyad, it's restricted. So if somebody came up to you saying that no, we can't do any slave, we have to free a believing slave, the asl is that it's mutlaq. The asl is that it's mutlaq. Remember the word asl we explained in the beginning of Usool fiqh. Asl has a number of meanings. And we've taken many of, one of them is the al-qa'ida al-mustamirra or al-rajih and so on. And we've taken many of these meanings. So al-asl fil kalam al-haqiqa. The asl when it comes to kalam is that we take the haqiqa meaning and not the majaz meaning. That's the asl. So likewise here, the asl is that we stick to the mutlaq until there's a dalil to show that it's muqayyad. So if somebody was to come, and what I mean by asl, I mean the base ruling is that we take the mutlaq. If somebody comes along and says no, it's muqayyad, then the one who's coming and saying that it's muqayyad, he's going against the asl, he's going against the base ruling, he's going against the origin. So he is the one that has to bring a dalil. So we don't have to. So if somebody says that it's muqayyad and not mutlaq, then the one who says mutlaq, he doesn't have to bring a dalil to prove that it's mutlaq. Rather, it's the one who says that it's muqayyad, he has to bring a dalil, a proof, to show that it is muqayyad. So that's the benefit of knowing this issue as well, is that we act upon the mutlaq until there is a dalil to show that it is muqayyad, until there is a dalil to show that it is restricted. So if somebody does come along and says muqayyad, you have to bring that dalil with them. They have to bring that dalil with them. Okay, now the Shaykh is going to talk about an issue which is a very famous issue. And before we actually read, okay, what the Shaykh says, it might get a bit confusing. So what I want to do is explain this issue first, and then after that we can go into, we can read what the Shaykh says. And I'll try to mention the same examples that the Shaykh has mentioned so that when you do read it, it becomes a lot faster. Now, it'd be very good and easy if you to draw a little tree diagram. Now, alhamdulillah, with Zoom, I think I should be able to use a whiteboard. Alhamdulillah. Right. Okay. Now, this issue is this one I might just write in English, is you I don't think I'll have space to write the title, so you can write the title yourself, but the title would be, so you can write the title on top. The title would be, if a mutlaq is contradicting with a muqayyad, what do you do? If a mutlaq is contradicting with a muqayyad, what do you do? Or which do you give preference to? And so on. That's the title. So you can write the title over here if you want, at the top. Okay. Now, in this case, we split it into two because there are two scenarios. What do I mean by a mutlaq and muqayyad? Meaning, in one ayah, Allah's talking about something and it's mutlaq. And Allah's talking about similar thing or same thing in a different ayah, and it is muqayyad. So what do we do in that scenario? What we do in that scenario is, what we do is that these mutlaq and muqayyads, when you look at all of them, then there are two states. That either the ruling is the same. Actually, if I type it might be better. One second. Ruling. Okay. Or it could be, you could have different rulings. And we'll explain what I mean by that. Ruling. And when it's the same ruling, that also has two more. That also has two more scenarios. This also has two more scenarios, which is, firstly, same ruling and reason. Over here, same ruling and different reason. Right. Don't worry, I'll explain this now, inshallah. And actually, let's just finish drawing this first, so that we can clearly then just focus on the explanation. This different ruling also has two scenarios. Different ruling on the left also has two scenarios, which is different ruling, same reason, and this one is ruling Okay. So I'll just give you guys about 10-20 seconds to write all this down. Okay, let's explain what this means now, inshallah. Okay. So the same ruling, in fact, it might be better for the same ruling on the left and different ruling on the right. But in Arabic, you would write it this way. Ala kulli hal. What this basically means is that, let's take this one. Same ruling and reason. So we have two texts. One is mutlaq and one is muqayyad. However, the reason is the same. Meaning the reason that this text is the reason why this text has been revealed, or the issue that it is talking about, is the same. That's what we mean by reason. And ruling is that the hukum, the ruling that we have, and what to do, that is also the same. So let's give an example, right? We have a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, "La nikaha illa biwali wa shahidain." La nikaha illa biwali wa shahidain. There is no nikah except with a wali and two witnesses. So this would come under the same ruling and reason. This is an example for same ruling and reason. Okay. Under this one here, I've just scribbled. Okay, you can write that yourself, inshallah. So that's the first hadith. The hadith is there is no nikah except with a wali and two witnesses. Okay. Now, and this hadith has been authenticated by Al-Albani. This hadith has been authenticated by Al-Albani. Right. I want to focus on the word witnesses. Is the word witnesses mutlaq or muqayyad? It is mutlaq. I can't hear you, but inshallah you guys answered once I give you a little pause. So it is mutlaq, meaning it can be, this hadith, it is not restricted. It does not restrict what type of witness. Should it be a man? You could argue and there should be two men because it's mudhakkar. But in terms of should it be young, old, trustworthy, not trustworthy, it's mutlaq. It's mutlaq, shahid. So it could be any two witnesses. But in another hadith, and this is a separate hadith. This is a separate hadith that's narrated by different books. The Prophet ﷺ said, "La nikaha illa biwali wa shahiday adl." That there is no nikah except with a wali and two trustworthy witnesses. There's no nikah except with a wali and two trustworthy witnesses. So the first hadith, there's no nikah except with a wali and two witnesses. And the second hadith is that there is no nikah except with a wali and two trustworthy witnesses. Now, as you can see, the issue is the same. So the reason is the same. They're both talking about nikah. And the ruling is the same. They're both talking about witnesses. However, one is mutlaq and the other is restricted. What do you do in this case? So this comes back to the issue. What to do when a mutlaq and muqayyad contradict one another? In this case, what you do is that I'm just going to write restricts. That's the answer. I'm not going to mention the example. You can write the example yourself. But I'm just going to put under here. It restricts, meaning the muqayyad does restrict the mutlaq. So what is the ruling in this issue? That according to these two ahadith, like I said, we don't want to go into any fiqhi issues, but just from the perspective of usool al-fiqh, with these two ahadith that we have, without looking at anything else, just these two ahadith for now. Do the witnesses have to be trustworthy? Yes or no? The answer is yes. So somebody can say, no, wait a minute. There's a hadith for Prophet that he said that La nikah illa bi wali wa shahidain. There's no nikah except with a wali and two witnesses. The Prophet left it mutlaq. We say, no. but there's the other hadith where the Prophet made it muqayyad wa shahiday adl, two trustworthy witnesses. So, and because the ruling and the reason are both the same, then in this scenario, the second hadith does restrict the first hadith. So the conclusion is that the two witnesses have to be trustworthy witnesses. They have to be trustworthy witnesses. So that is, so inshallah makes sense. If it doesn't, somebody send a message or just stop me inshallah and I'll repeat again. But that shows us that explains this first type that we have, which is the same ruling and reason. Right, let's move on to the second, which is the same ruling and different reason. Makes sense? Alhamdulillah. Okay, good. Same ruling and different reason. So in this case is that the ruling is the same, meaning the ruling is the same. So whatever the hukm is, that is the same, but the reason, the scenario, or maybe the reason of why that hadith or ayah has been mentioned is different. Okay, so we can say there's two different issues, but in both issues the same ruling has been given. In one, that ruling was mutlaq, and in the other it was muqayyad. So can we say, even though it's a separate issue, separate reason, can we say that that other hadith or ayah in this other scenario, which is muqayyad, can that also restrict the mutlaq ruling in this other scenario? So that's what the issue is. So let's give you an example. This is the same example that we've taken previously. So if you take the example of in the kafara of al-dhihar, in the expiation of al-dhihar, which is saying to your wife that you are like the back of my mother, which is not allowed. In that, remember, it was mutlaq. فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, you free a slave. It was mutlaq. But when it came to the ruling or the expiation of killing somebody by mistake, kafaratul khata or kafaratul qatl al-khata, then it was muqayyad. فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ, so it has to be a believing slave. Now these two, the first is al-dhihar and the second is killing somebody by mistake. Are they two different issues, two different reasons? Yes, they are two different reasons. Is the ruling the same? The ruling is the same, freeing a slave. Both you have to free a slave, but one is mutlaq and the other is muqayyad. Right. In this scenario, what do you do? Can the ruling which is restricted in the killing by mistake, can we use that to restrict the other issue, which is kafarat al-dhihar? So can we say in kafarat al-dhihar that no, even in kafarat al-dhihar, even though the ayah is mutlaq, but due to this other ayah, can we restrict it and say that you can only free a believing slave? And the answer to this is that the majority of the ulama, they say yes, it restricts. The majority of ulama say yes. Even in kafaratu al-dhihar, it has to be a believing slave. So we can't do any slave. Okay, this is the majority of this. So there are some ulama that say no. They say that, and I believe the Hanafis, if I'm not mistaken, they say no, but the majority of the ulama say it does restrict. So I see this is very important now, because if somebody did not know Usool al-Fiqh and they just went into the ayah themselves, then they would come out with the wrong conclusion. But once somebody studies Usool al-Fiqh, then they can come to the correct conclusion, and also they can stay consistent as well. So anytime there's a ruling or there's two rulings, there's two issues, the reasons are different but the ruling is the same, then they can use the this is yuhmal al-mutlaq al-muqayyad, meaning the text which is restricted, it can restrict the other hadith or the other ayah or other texts also. So this is in regards to if it has the same ruling. If it has different rulings, okay, this is also two scenarios. This is also two scenarios. So the first is when you have different ruling and the same reason. Different ruling but the same reason. So for example, if we take the ayah of at-tayammum, let's take the ayah of tayammum. Allah says, فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ min. That, wipe your faces and your hands from it, from the turab that you have taken that dust from. So if you look at the word hands here, hands is mutlaq. It's not now the word yad in Arabic can be, it can have, it's not just restricted till here, even though we do understand it for it to be here, but we understand it because of, because we know what the ruling is. But I want to focus more on the Usool al-Fiqh side of it. So yad, it could mean here, but it could also mean, it could even extend it to your elbow. Okay? But, so in this ayah, regarding at-tayammum, the hand is mutlaq. The hand is mutlaq. But then the second scenario is wudu. Wudu فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ لَمَرَافِقْ. When we wash our hands in wudu the second time, at the beginning, but the second time after our faces, then that ruling extends from here, from your fingertips, all the way until and including your elbows, right? So here, so in wudu, it's muqayyad, it's restricted. It's told us from here till and including your elbows. So the ruling is different. The ruling is different. The ruling in terms of how much, firstly, how much to do. And also the second is that in tayammum, you have to wipe. In tayammum, you wipe. Whereas in wudu, you wash. In wudu, you wash. So in tayammum, you wipe, and in wudu, you wash. Right. So the ruling is different. But the reason is the same. The reason is the same because the reason is both when you're in a state of hadith. State of hadith means that you need to do wudu, or tayammum if you don't have water. So it's the same thing. So if you don't have water, or you're not able to use water, then you go to tayammum. So the reason behind it is the same, that you have to get rid of your hadith. So what do you do in this case? Can you use one ayah to restrict the other ayah? In this case, then the majority of the ulama, sorry, not the majority, all the ulama. 1 second, is it majority or is it all? موافق للمطلق في السبب دون حكم. The majority, yes, majority of the ulama, they say that it does not restrict. It does not restrict. So it is not restricted. So we don't turn around and say that, okay, because this ayah mentioned this, then we can do taqeed, we can restrict the other ayah. But so the majority of ulama say that it does not restrict. As for different rulings and different reason, and this one's quite straightforward. This does not restrict. Okay. So an example of this is, so for example, Allah says regarding person who steals, وَسَارِقُ وَسَارِقَةُ فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. The sariq, the one who steals, the thief, then you cut off their hands. Aid, again, hand. Where does the hand go? Is it to your wrist or is it to your elbow? Because in ayat al-wudu, we wash until our elbows. So here, do we say that, oh no, the sariq, because in the ayat al-wudu it's muqayyad, it's been restricted, but regarding the thief is unrestricted, we can use the ayat al-wudu to restrict the cutting of the hand of the thief. So we don't cut off until the wrist, but we cut off until the elbow. The answer is no, because the ruling is different. One is cutting, one is washing. And second is the reason is different. One's for stealing, and the other is for removing spiritual impurity, which is the state of hadith. So as you can see, there are different scenarios depending on the different ayat, whether some are mutlaq and some are muqayyad. Now, if it does make it easier for you, then as you can see, under the same ruling, there are two scenarios, right? Same ruling and reason, and same ruling and different reason. Both of them restrict, but one just says the majority of the ulama. So this is the reason why we split it in a bit more into 4 types in total, because there's a bit of khilaf. But especially at this stage, you don't need to worry about the khilaf. So if you want to make it easier for you, both of these restrict and both of these do not restrict on the left side, the different ruling. So if you want to make it easier, if you just want to remember that if it's the same ruling, then it restricts. And if it's different rulings, then it doesn't restrict. As for the reason, you don't need to worry about that. too much. That doesn't affect the ruling. So after we study this in detail, the conclusion, if you want to come to that conclusion, then that's not a problem, especially for this stage. It makes it a lot easier for a person to remember, because sometimes it can get difficult to remember later on. Actually, different ruling, reason, same ruling, same reason, different ruling, same reasons. You know, it can kind of get a bit complicated like that. So if somebody does want to remember it in the sense that the same ruling, it restricts. Different ruling does not restrict, then that is also fine for a person to understand it like that, inshallah. I'm just going to stop for a second. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, then just put like a no in the chat or something, or just say no so I know to carry on. Okay, I think there's no questions. No? All right, somebody said no. Okay, خلاص. Let's go back to the book then, inshallah. Okay, can you all see the book now? Back to the book, which page again? Page 63. Can you see the book? Yeah, okay. So now this is the Sheikh, he is basically going to explain what we have just explained. Okay, so but I decided to explain it in a graph format. I think it's a bit easier to understand rather than just reading in text. But inshallah, now that you've understood, inshallah, it should make a lot more sense, and that way we can read this a bit faster as well. So the Sheikh, he says, when we get absolute, meaning mutlaq, text, and another which is restricted, muqayyad, concerning the same issue, then we apply the restriction to the absolute text. If they are concerning different issues, then we must act on both of them with the restriction of one and the absoluteness of the other. Meaning, so the Sheikh says, if they are concerning different issues, different reasons, then you must act on both of them. Meaning, whatever the ruling is for this, keep that the ruling there. And whatever the ruling is for the other, we leave that there, which is a restriction of the one, meaning with the one which is restricted, keep it to restricted, and the one which is absolute, keep, or meaning mutlaq, keep that as mutlaq. The restricted one does not restrict the mutlaq. An example, he's going to give an example of all of this now. An example of when the issue of both texts is one is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the expression of al-zihar, pronouncing one's wife as the back of his mother, intending by a divorce. فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مِّن قَبْلِ يَتَمَاسَ, the freeing of a slave, mutlaq. And he's saying about the expiation for murder, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ, freeing a believing slave. So the ruling is the same, the freeing of a slave. Okay, that's the raqaba is more of a, it's referring to your neck, so it's more of a literal translation. It means it's referring to freeing a slave. So we must restrict the absolute nature of the first verse in the expiation of zihar, and restrict it also freeing a believing slave, which is the same as a restricted verse pertaining to the expiation for the murder. So in both cases, the slave being freed should be a believer. Okay. Then he says, an example of when the ruling is for different issues is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High. And whether, if you notice, the Shaykh had split it into two. The first two types that we split it into. But obviously I went into a bit more detail and split it into four. But and I've tried to use the same examples as well, the same examples. So it should make sense, inshallah. And an example of when the ruling is for different issues is the saying of the Most High, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. As for the thief, the male and female, amputate their hands. And he's saying in the verse regarding ablution, wash your faces and your forearms to the elbows. Okay, forearms meaning your hands, from your hands, the fingertips, till your, and including your elbows. Here the ruling is different, although appear similar. In the first it's mentioning cutting, or it mentions cutting, and in the second, wash. So we do not restrict the first text by the second text, but the first verse remains absolute. The first one remains mutlaq. We keep it as it is. And that the cutting should be from the wrist. And the second likewise remains restricted, the washing being done upon to and including the elbows. Meaning, we keep the second above, we keep that ruling for the wudu. And as for the first, that we do not apply this restriction which is in the ayah of wudu upon the restriction, upon the mutlaq, the unrestrictedness of the first ayah. And obviously, then there's, we have secondary, we have other proofs now from the sunnah and so on that you cut off until you cut from the left hand until the wrist from the sunnah. We learned that from the sunnah, but if you're looking at it just from the ayah perspective, and this should explain, inshallah, mutlaq and muqayyad. And reading in text, especially, I'll be honest, even me reading this with the English translation, subhanAllah, I find reading the Arabic, it makes a lot more sense to me, the Arabic, than the English. But if you don't understand the text too much here, then as long as you understand the tree diagram that we drew, then inshallah, that's more than enough. Bismillah. And alhamdulillah, with that we have finished the chapter of mutlaq and muqayyad. The next chapter is known as al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. Al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. I'll write this for you. How do you draw? I don't think I'm able to annotate here. It's called mutlaq and muqayyad. It's called mujmal and mubayyan. Al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. This is written here in English. Al-mujmal, and is mubayyan written anywhere? Al-mubayyan. Should be al-mubayyan. Al-mubayyan. Yeah, alif nun. That's a big difference in meaning. Mubayyin and mubayyan. Anyways, what is al-mujmal and mubayyan? SubhanAllah, as you can see, usul fiqh is tricky as it is. It's tricky even with translation in English. Even Arabic is quite, for the first time if you're studying it, it can get a bit tricky. But you can also see, I've pointed out a few mistakes in translation and so on, and that shows the importance of learning the Arabic language. And by the way, a lot of brothers, when I was there in Kuwait, did actually ask me about, do I teach Arabic? And the answer is yes, I do. And I will be starting new classes in about a month's time or something. So you just speak to the brother in charge, inshallah, you can get the details. And inshallah, when I do start, then I can send the poster out for that. Okay, al-mujmal and mubayyan. Mujmal is translated to obscure. In other words, you can maybe say ambiguous. That might be, might make a bit more sense. And mubayyan is clarifying. So something is ambiguous, and the opposite is something which has been clarified. Something which has been clarified. Now, al-mujmal, let's read what the Shaykh says. Obscure linguistically, mujmal linguistically, means obscure or accumulated. We don't need the linguistic meaning. And the technical meaning is what does not allow understanding of what is meant except by something specifying it, clarifying its description or its amount. Meaning there's a word, you do understand what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't understand what the word means, but it could have more than one meaning and you don't know which meaning it's referring to. So you do understand the meaning, but you don't know exactly what it's referring to. You do know the meaning, but you don't know exactly what it is referring to. And that's why another definition that some of the Usooliyun give, another definition for something which is mujmal, they say al-lafz al-mutaraddid bayna ma'nayn fa-akthar. They say that a mujmal is a word which is mutaraddid. It means going back and forth. Going back and forth between two or more meanings. Two or more meanings ala sawa, equally. Meaning you have a word and it could mean 2-3 different things. Sometimes two, minimum 2, but it could be 3, 4, 5. It could be however many, depending on the word. but you do not know which of these meaning is intended. Okay, now let's take an example of this. Let's take an example of this. I'm going to come back to what the Sheikh says here, by something else specifying it, clarifying its description or its amount. We're going to get to that in a second, inshallah. But وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوء. This word quru, which is plural of the word qar. So divorced women remain in the waiting period after they are divorced for 3, it says periods, okay. The word qar, let's see what the Shaykh says. The term al-qar is a word which shares meanings between menstruation and purity. The word qar in Arabic could have 2 meanings. It could mean the menstruation where the woman is on her period. That could be a meaning. Or it could mean the exact opposite, which is when she is pure. That's just how the word is in Arabic. It could mean when she's on her period, or it could mean when she is pure. And these are 2 opposites. You can't combine either she's on a period or she's not, right? And they're 50-50 now. So how do we know which meaning is intended? This is where the word is mujmal. So we say the word qar is mujmal. Now we need an external dalil to prove to us or to show us what is the meaning. So now this is why the Shaykh says, if you go back to the definition, what does not allow understanding of what it is meant. So this is inshallah makes sense now, or what mujmal means. That this word, for example, this word qar, it could have 2 meanings. You don't know exactly what it means, and the only way we know the meaning is one of 3 ways, except by something else specifying it, clarifying its description. So something general, you're told to do something, but you just don't know how. The how part has not been explained. And then the third, its amount. We're going to get to the examples for each one. So the first one, we need something else specifying it, is word qara. So here we would need to look at the sunnah or the aqwal of the sahaba who have explained what qar means, or what is intended in the ayah, for us to know which of the 2 meanings it is. The example of clarifying this description, I think a very easy example is this. An example of what needs something else explaining its description is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, establish the prayer. Indeed, establishing the prayer is unknown and needs to be explained. From this ayah, establish the prayer, okay, we know it's obligatory to pray now, because it's an amr, it's a command, and it's unrestricted. So an unrestricted command shows what necessitates obligation, as we took previously. But how do we pray? From this ayah alone, it is mujmal. And the last one is an example of what needs something else explaining its amount is the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, pay the zakah. Likewise, the amount of zakah that is obligatory to pay is unknown from this verse, and he's clarifying. So the word zakah in this ayah by itself is mujmal. Okay, by itself is mujmal. No. And the matter here is similar to the previous matter. You know, we talked about mutlaq and muqayyad, that sometimes words, depending on the way you look at it, it could be mutlaq and it could be muqayyad. So here you could argue that in terms of its ruling, it's mubayyin, it's clarified, which is the obligation. So what's the ruling of zakah? From this ayah, we can deduce that it is obligatory because it's a commandment. So we can say that is mujmal. That is mubayyin. As for the how, or in this case, how much, and as for the salah, how to pray, then we can say that is mubayyin. Again, that's if you really want to be really technical about it. But if you just say that how to pray salah and how much zakah to give, that is mujmal, ambiguous, we don't know, then that is correct. Obviously by itself. And now we move on to al-mubayyin. So we talked about mujmal. We talked about mujmal. Now the Shaykh is going to talk about a bit about mubayyin now. So the Shaykh, he says al-mubayyin linguistically refers to a clarifier. Okay, or mubayyin is something which the Shaykh uses the word mubayyin. But okay, if you want to use the word mubayyin, then it would mean something which is a clarifier or an explainer. If it's al-mubayyin, then it's a clarifier or explainer. And if it's al-mubayyan, something which is clarified and something which is explained. That's if you say al-mubayyan. That's the difference in meaning in terms of the Arabic. And technically, it means when the meaning is understood by it, either the word itself in its original form or after an explanation. So, in simple terms, mubayyan is the word which is understood. You understand exactly what it means. And the Sheikh mentions that there are two types, either from the word itself in its original, meaning when you hear this word, you don't need any explanation, you know what it means. Or the second, after an explanation, meaning when you've heard it, you actually need an explanation. But once you've got that explanation and you've got that clarification, then it's changed from being mujmal and now it is mubayyan. An example of what is understood from the word itself, I mean the first type where just by hearing the word you know what it means, is the word sky, land, mountain, justice, injustice, sincerity. These words and the like are understood and do not need something else to explain it. If I say to you sky, everyone knows what the sky is. You don't need to explain it. That is something which is mubayyan. An example of what is understood after clarification is a saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, and establish the prayer and pay the zakah. The establishing and giving are both unclear. So how to pray and how much to give by themselves are unclear. But the legislation has explained them, so both words have become clear after they have been explained. Now, for us, is how to pray salah, does it remain mujmal or is it now mubayyan for us? We'll say now it is mubayyan. Alhamdulillah, I think most of us, we know how to pray. Inshallah, we should know how to pray, so it's obligatory. So it is now mubayyan. For us, it is mubayyan. The wording itself is mujmal, but now after it's been explained with the other ayat and ahadith and so on, then whether it's a saying of Prophet ﷺ, whether it's actions of Prophet ﷺ, and also how the ulama have explained it and so on, it's become mubayyan. And likewise with zakah, what to give zakah upon and how much to give zakah upon, it has become mubayyan for us. It has become mubayyan for us. Acting on mujmal, a mujmal text. Okay, so those words which are mujmal are not clear, ambiguous, and so on. Then do we have to act upon them or not? The mukallaf person must act upon the mujmal when the explanation is made clear to him. Meaning, when something's mujmal by itself, you can't act upon it because you don't know. Yeah. But once it's become clear, once it's been explained, then you have to act upon the explanation that you have received. That's what it means. Okay. So, I mean, if you didn't know how to pray salah, how do you pray? How are you going to pray if you didn't know how to pray at all? But once it's been explained to you, then you have to pray in the way that it has been explained to you. And now after this, the Sheikh, he moves on to the next sentence. And this next sentence, it might have been nice if the translator put it on the next paragraph. Now the Sheikh basically talks about is the religion generally. Somebody sent a question. Means once it becomes mubayyan, then a person must act upon it. Once it becomes mubayyan, no mubayyan. Mubayyan, if you look, this is the issue with translation. Mubayyan is the thing that explains. The things that explains. Mubayyan is something which is explained. So if the issue has become mubayyan, explained and clarified, then you have to act upon it. Mubayyan is a thing which explains and clarifies, whether it's a separate hadith or whatever it may be. Okay, so yes, correct. Once it becomes mubayyan, I read what you said. Once it's become mubayyan, then yes, you have to act upon. Act upon that. Right. The next sentence, where it says the person explained, the Shaykh now talks about the issue which is that is the religion mubayyan, or are there things in the religion which are mujmal, which are things which are mujmal, and we can answer this by saying that an unrestricted ijmal, unrestricted form of ambiguosity, meaning the whole religion not being explained, meaning the whole religion being ambiguous, is not there. Meaning the whole religion has been explained. The whole religion has been explained with the Sharia through the ayat and the hadith of Prophet. Hence, in Hajjatul Wada', the Prophet said, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-Islam deena." That today I have completed for you your religion. Everything in the religion has been mentioned and it has been explained and it has been clarified. And also here, the Shaykh, he says, so let's see what the Shaykh says. He says, the Prophet ﷺ explained to his nation of followers all the legislation, its principles and subsidiary matters, so much so that he left the nation on a clear path, clear and pure white path, its night like that of his day, and he did not leave explaining something at the time of a need at all. Until here, so much so that he left the nation on a clear and pure white path, its night like that of his day, is an indication to a hadith of Prophet ﷺ, which has been narrated by Imam Ahmad, Ibn Majah, Al-Hakim in his Mustadrak. Inshallah, you guys understand what these words mean now. So Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, Ibn Majah in his Sunan, and Hakim in his Mustadrak. It's been authenticated by Al-Albani, where the Prophet ﷺ said, تَرَكْتُكُمْ عَلَى الْبَيْضَاءِ, I have left you upon a white, i.e. a pure white path, as it's been translated here. لَيْلُهَا كَنَهَارِهَا, its night is like its day. I mean, just as clear the day is, the night is also clear, like there's no issue, everything's clear. لَا يَزِيغُ عَنْهَا بَعْدِي إِلَّا هَلِكَ, nobody deviates from it, i.e. from this clear white path, except a halik, somebody who is destroyed. So that's an indication to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, so also, now I just want to stop here at the word obviously day. So I've explained that this unrestricted type of ambiguity is not there. However, we can say a subjective type of ambiguity is there. A subjective type of ambiguity is there, meaning that everything's been explained. However, a person may not know everything. It might be hidden from that person, whether it's he didn't know the hadith, he didn't know the meaning of the hadith, he didn't know how to deal with the contradictions or the apparent contradictions between certain hadith, and so on. So maybe just because a person doesn't know, just because a certain alim doesn't know, doesn't mean that the religion has not been explained. It's just, to this person, it's subjective. This person doesn't know, but that does not necessitate that the religion has not explained it. So inshallah, that makes sense. So the whole of the religion is mubayyan. The whole of the religion is mubayyan, and it is not mujmal. And the only thing which may be mujmal is certain things which are subjective to a person. Okay. I don't want to mention here though, there may be, very certain small points in the religion which one could call mujmal, but it's not a deficiency in the religion or anything like that. And these things are like the things from the unseen. Things in the unseen, or the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? In terms of meaning, we know what the meaning is, but in terms of the kayfiyah, how, so the characteristics of Allah, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. Allah rose above the throne. How he rose, those things we don't know. Those things we could, you don't really call it mujmal, because it's something which has been intended to be left like that, and we can't say that these are mubayyin. We can't say that these have been clarified. So nobody can turn around and say that, oh, Allah rose above the throne in this manner or that manner, because there's nothing there's no mubayyin that has explained it, that has clarified it. Okay. So, and the reason for that is because with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or generally anything that you want to know the how or something. And by the way, as Imam Malik said, asking how is a bid'ah. Okay, we're not allowed to ask how because it's something which has not been explained to us by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's not something we can know as well. What should we call the attributes then, if not mujmal and mubayyin? Wallahu alam, I'm not sure. I've not actually seen any of the ulama of Aqidah, or I can't remember if any ulama of Aqidah have commented on specific attributes of Allah saying they're mujmal and mubayyin. I could guess that you can say that the meaning is mubayyin. The meaning is mubayyin in the Arabic language. Istawa means Allah rose. We know what that means. Allah yasma', Allah hears. But in terms of the how, we could say it is mujmal. Allah, you could say it is mujmal. But I don't want to, especially in Aqidah, I don't want to be 100% or something. If I'm not, I've not actually read it anyway, so I don't want to say anything like that. But we could say it. Okay. And it's back to the point where I was saying that the reason we can't make it mubayyan is because the only way that you know the reality of something is by three ways. Either you've seen it. So if I say to you, I don't know, you guys in Kuwait, Al-Masjid Al-Kabir, for example, right? So how do you know what it looks like? It's either you've seen it, whether either you've gone there or somebody's seen pictures online. Okay, you've seen it. Or you've seen, number two, something similar to it. So, for example, if you were to buy a car, now the exact car that you're buying, they might not have shown you the exact car, but they've shown you, a car that's on display. Okay, so you're actually buying a different car which is in the garage or whatever, but they're showing you one on display. So you've seen the exact same. That's fine because you know how it looks like because they're showing you something similar to it. Or thirdly, or the third way is that somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy informs you about it. Somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy informs you about it. So if you couldn't see something or see any pictures or anything similar, another model or anything, somebody would come along and say, explain, it's like this, it's like this, it's like that. So you know about it. And with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you haven't seen Allah. And there's nothing like Allah. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. There's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third, which is somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy comes to explain it, in this case, it will be the Prophet ﷺ. The person has not explained the details of this. So if the person has not explained it, then there's no way that we can understand the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I've gone off on a bit of a tangent regarding this issue of Asma Sifat, but I just thought it was appropriate to mention it here. No. So if you go back to what the Sheikh is saying now, so basically the whole religion we can say is mubayyin. The whole religion in general is mubayyin. And then the Shaykh, he says, and he, the Prophet ﷺ, did not leave explaining something at the time of need at all. This is actually a principle. In Usool al-Fiqh. And the Shaykh actually has changed the wording slightly of this principle of how it's famously known. And the way the Shaykh has actually written it is very good because it shows adab and respect with the Prophet ﷺ. And this principle is, well, I think it's good if you stick to the wording of the Shaykh, which is the Prophet ﷺ did not leave explaining something at the time of need at all. The Prophet ﷺ did not leave explaining something at the time of need at all. What this means is that, let's say, something happened in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the person did not do inkar, he did not rebuke it, he did not correct that person, or whatever the case may be. And then the person left. No one can turn around and say that, oh, maybe the person explained it later on, maybe he did it. No, because at that time when the person was doing it, then the person had to clarify it. And the fact that the person did not clarify it showed that it's permissible, or whatever he did was correct. We're going to talk about later on the different types of approvals of the Prophet ﷺ, what they mean. But this is an example to explain this principle, is that the person did not delay anything after a time of need. Okay, so you could say he did not leave explaining something at the time of need, or you could, I think more. What's the Arabic? What did the Shaykh say? وَلَمْ يَتْرُكُ الْبَيَانَ عِنْدَ الْحَاجَةِ إِلَيْهِ أَبْدًا. Okay, that's the right translation of the Arabic. The more famous way that the Usooliyin mentioned this principle, like I said, the Shaykh changed it to show more adab with Allah. They say, لا يجوز تأخير البيان عن وقت الحاجة. لا يجوز تأخير البيان عن وقت الحاجة. It is not permissible, for the Prophet, to delay clarification عن وقت الحاجة until after the time of need. It is not permissible for the Prophet to delay the bayan, explanation or clarification, until after the time of need. So that is, another way to explain it. And the thing where the difference, which is good, what the Shaykh did, is the word, it is not permissible. For you to say it's not permissible for the person to do this, it's a bit, it doesn't show much other, but the way the Shaykh said it was better, that the person did not do it. But if a person, and the majority of the Usuliyin do say it like this, لا يجوز تأخير البيان, it is not permissible to delay the clarification until after the time of need, then it's not, it's not sin or anything like that. It's just, something that the Shaykh has done, which is something good. May Allah reward the Shaykh for that. Now, and the Prophet's explanation was either delivered orally or in deed or by word and deed both. So this is now showing the different types and different ways that the Prophet ﷺ, his different ways that he would do bayan, al-mubayyan from the word bayan, explanation, all the different ways. The Shaykh mentioned 3 ways. Either first is bil qawl, by speech. Okay, and the Shaykh is going to give his example. So he's going to say an example of his oral explanation is his informing us of amounts and set limits of zakah, such as he's saying 1/10 of water is watered by the sky, which explains the generality of the saying of the Most High, "Atu zakah," and pay the zakah. So in terms of if you have crops and so on, and if it rains and so on, then you have to give 1/10 of that. Where did that 1/10 come from? From a speech, the saying of the Prophet ﷺ. That's just an example. I don't want to go into the zakah rulings, but that's just an example of speech already. Example of action. For instance, an example of him explaining through action is establishing the rituals of Hajj in front of all of his followers, making clear the generality of his saying, وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. That Hajj is obligatory. How do we do Hajj? We look at the actions of the Prophet. As well as his praying the eclipse prayer according to his description, which in reality is a practical example of the obscurity of his own saying, if you see any of it, then pray. So Prophet said, if you see the eclipse, then pray. How do you pray? We take that from the actions and the way the Prophet ﷺ had prayed. An example of his word and deed. So sometimes it'd be a combination of both. An example of the word orally and physical actions of Prophet ﷺ is his explanation on how to pray. So how to pray? With his speech, as in the narration of the man who prayed badly in the Prophet, he said, if you go to pray, complete the ablution properly, then face the Qibla, say Allah Akbar until the end of the narration. And through his actions also, as in the narration of Sahal ibn Sa'ad as-Sa'idi, radiallahu anh, that the Prophet ﷺ was on the pulpit and said Allahu Akbar, and the people behind him did the same while he was on the pulpit. And in the same narration, he turned and said to the people, I have done this so that you may follow me and learn my prayer. Meaning, the first example is Prophet physically said, إذا قمت إلى الصلاة فكبر. When you get up to pray, then do the takbir, and then do this, and then do that, and so on. So Prophet physically explained how to pray. And in the other narration, the Prophet in front of everyone prayed, and then even in the end he said, I did this so you can learn from my action, physical action, how to do it. So that is some ways how the Prophet would explain something which is mujmal. Now we move on to the next chapter, and what we'll do now, I think we've been going on for an hour, so let's take a quick, only a 5-minute break, inshallah. We'll take a 5-minute break, and after 5 minutes we will continue. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Okay, we're back. Yeah, okay. Right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The next chapter is the apparent and the interpreted. Al-Zahir wal-Mu'awwal. Al-Zahir wal-Mu'awwal. So what is Al-Zahir and what is Al-Mu'awwal? Let's read what the Sheikh said. He says, he just focuses on Al-Zahir at the moment. So let's read what he says. We'll explain it and then I'll explain what Al-Mu'awwal is as well. He says, the definition of Al-Zahir, apparent linguistically, means clear and manifest. Technically it means whatever shows by itself of the most likely meaning with the possibility of other meanings. Meaning you have a word, and a word could have two meanings. A word could have two meanings. And you take the stronger meaning or the more apparent meaning. So if you take that, then that would mean you've taken the Zahir meaning. Now. And Al-Mu'awwal is basically you've not taken the stronger, you've taken the weaker. You've taken the weaker meaning. You've taken the weaker meaning, but you've taken it due to a dalil. We're going to get to that, inshallah. You've taken the other meaning, which is a bit weaker, but you've taken it due to a dalil, which would make it stronger. But the point being is that it's the weaker meaning. Okay. So this chapter, I'll give you an example. Let's read an example first. An example of this is the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, make ablution after eating camel meat. The apparent meaning, which is intended by the word ablution, is making ablution that has been legislated and not just washing yourself. The word wudu, it could, if you think of a more linguistic meaning, it could just mean washing yourself. But what the Prophet ﷺ says, تَوَضَّأُ مِنْ لُحُوبِ الْإِبِلِ, that wash, I do wudu after eating camel meat. Then what type of wudu is he talking to? What seems to be more apparent is he's talking about the Islamic meaning of wudu. He's talking about the Islamic meaning of wudu. So we've taken that meaning, and that's called Zahir. That's called Zahir. What we are talking about here in this chapter, what the author has done, and it's connected to the previous chapter as well, is it's still an extension of the chapter when we talk about kalam, speech. All of this is to do with speech. It's all about the words and what the words indicate and the words mean. And right now, we are talking about words from the angle of how clear its meaning is. How clear or unclear its meaning is. How clear or unclear its meaning is. And in reality, you have four. In reality, there are four of these types. So splitting a word in terms of its meaning, in terms of how clear its meaning is and how unclear it is, then there are four. The first is known as An-Nas. An-Nas, Nun Sad, or Alif Lam Nun Sad. The Shaykh doesn't actually mention this, I don't think. He doesn't mention it. But the first is An-Nas. The second is Al-Zahir. The second is Al-Zahir. And the third is Al-Mu'awwal. Al-Mu'awwal. And the fourth is Al-Mujmal. The fourth is Al-Mujmal, which we took previously. An-Nas, okay, An-Nas is that which does not have except one meaning. Is that which does not have except one meaning. Or that which has only one meaning. That's called Nas, okay? So, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ عَشَرَةٌ كَامِلَةٌ. That is 10 full. Or 10 full days. Right, the word 10. That's Nas. Like, is there any other meaning? Does it mean 9? Does it mean 8? No, it's 10. Okay, Bunya al-Islam ala khams. The religion is built upon five pillars. The number 5. That's Nas. Okay, it's not restricted to numbers, but It's easy examples for you to understand. Okay. Now, Nas, you might be thinking, doesn't Nas mean text? And the plural is nusus, the text, mean the Quran and Sunnah. Yes, that's in the general sense. But when we're talking about it in the Usool of fiqh context, especially when you're talking about what the words mean, then Nas has a different meaning. Nas has a different meaning. Right, Zahir. So we have Nas, which only has one meaning. And then we have, after that, we have Zahir, where there's two meanings, but one is more apparent. One is arjah, one is stronger. And then the third is mu'awwal, where you've taken a weaker meaning, but you've taken it due to an external dalil. You've taken that due to an external dalil. Okay, so you've not taken that meaning which is apparent, but the reason you've done that is because there's an external dalil. And number 4 is al-mujmal, where it's more than one meaning, but you don't know which one is which meaning is intended. Okay, so that's the weakest because you don't know. So now the Shaykh, he starts off by, can I repeat? So the first is an-nas, which is that which only has one meaning. The second is al-zahir, which is, as the Shaykh has mentioned, it has more than one meaning and you've taken a stronger meaning. You have mu'awwal, you've taken the weaker meaning, but due to an external proof. Proof. And then the fourth is mujmal, which we took in the previous chapter, which is more than one meaning, but they're all equal. So you don't know which meaning is intended. You do not know which meaning is intended. Okay. If you carry on with what the Shaykh has said, the Shaykh has an example. He gives an example. Okay, next paragraph. What is excluded from our words, whatever shows by itself the most likely meaning, is whatever is mujmal, because it does not point to a meaning by itself. Because with mujmal, you don't know what was intended. So you can't really act upon anything. And what is excluded from our words, most likely meaning, is the interpreted, mu'awwal, meaning, because it points to the less correct view had it not been for a qarina, outside factor or external proof. And what is also excluded from our words with the possibility of other meanings is a clear text, a nas, because it only carries one meaning. So hopefully that makes sense. What's the ruling on acting upon the apparent text? Acting upon the apparent text is obligatory unless there is an evidence that takes it away from its apparent meaning, and that there is a more cautious approach, safer in fulfilling your, that it is a more cautious approach, safer in fulfilling your responsibility, and stronger for your worship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or for your worship compliance to the legislation. So the Shaykh has basically, what he has said here is that the asal is that whatever the apparent meaning, you take the zahir. The zahir basically, in other words, you could say apparent meaning. The zahir meaning, the apparent meaning. So even though there's possibility of something else, the asal is that you take the apparent meaning, the zahir meaning. Okay? And the Shaykh mentions 3 proofs for that. See, it's good if you number this because it might not be the most clear. In the English, it's actually missing. After it is a more cautious approach, here in Arabic it says لأن هذه طريقة السلف, because this is the way of the Salaf. That's the one that's missing. So you see here in Arabic it says العمل بالظاهر واجب إلا بدليل يصرفه عن ظاهره لأن هذه طريقة السلف. In the English it's not there, unless there is an evidence that takes it away from its apparent meaning, and that is a more cautious approach. Or even before that here, and after apparent meaning, because this is the way of the Salaf. That's the first one that he mentions in the Arabic. It's not there in the English. Point being is that the first is that this is the way of the Salaf from the Sahaba and Tabi'een and Atba' Tabi'een, they would, if you look at the way they were with all of the commandments and the prohibitions and the rulings, they would take the apparent meaning, unless there was a dalil. If there's a dalil, then of course we take the secondary dalil to show that the apparent meaning is not intended, which we're going to talk about in a second. When do we interpret and take the meaning which is not apparent? Okay. So first, yes, it's the way of the Salaf. The second is that, and it is more cautious approach, safer in fulfilling your responsibility. That should be one. I don't know why there's a comma. That's why I got confused. But that is a more cautious approach, safer in fulfilling your responsibility. لأنه أحوط وأبرأ للذمة. So the second is that it's safer. Okay, because you've taken a stronger opinion. You've taken that which is apparent and that which is stronger. Okay, and if you leave off that which is more apparent and that which is stronger, that means you've gone to something which is weaker, which it cannot be safer, right? So what is best is that a person sticks to is a stronger meaning, the more apparent meaning. And the third, he says, and it is stronger for your worship compliance, meaning it's better for a person, for his inqiyad. It is in his submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he left off. Sometimes when people take the weaker meaning, they're only taking that because of the desires and so on. So you take the apparent meaning, then you are not following your desires. And know what your opinion may be, but rather you are sticking to that which is in the Quran and Sunnah, or with that which is apparent from the Quran and Sunnah. So that is better for your worship also. Now the Shaykh is going to talk about Al-Mu'awwal. So he moves on to Al-Mu'awwal. Al-Mu'awwal linguistically comes from the word Al-Awwal, which means the first. Okay? Al-Awwal. Or Al-Awwal, which means the first, and also returning. If it's Al-Awwal, it means the first, and if it's Al-Awwal, then it means returning. And technically, it means when the wording holds the less likely meaning. When the wording holds the less likely meaning. So that might be a better wording than what I said previously. The wording holds the less likely meaning. Meaning, there's an apparent meaning, and then there's a weaker meaning. And what have you taken? And what's intended? The intended meaning is the weaker meaning. Okay? Don't worry, we'll get to some examples of that, inshallah. Okay, so what is excluded from our word when the wording holds a less likely meaning is the text and the apparent, and nas wa zahir. As for the text, it has a possibility of only one meaning, and as for apparent, then it holds the most likely meaning. Now the Shaykh is going to talk about, because the word mu'awwal is from the word ta'wil, which means interpretation. That's what they've interpreted it. They've translated it as interpreted. So now the Shaykh is going to talk about there's two types of ta'wil, two types of interpretations. Okay, so why have you gone from the apparent meaning? Why have you interpreted it as something else? So this interpretation is of two types. And the interpretation is of two types, acceptable and rejected. Ta'wilun sahih, and the second is ta'wilun fasid, accepted and rejected, or correct and void, or anything similar to that. So the Shaykh says, number one, the accepted interpretation is what is indicated by sound evidence, such as the saying of the Most High, and as the village, i.e. the people of the village. This ayah, wasal al-qarya, we've mentioned it before. Remember when we talked about al-haqiqa wal-majaz, okay? Now, there's no harm in using the same ayah twice, because that's looking at it from another aspect, whether is it a metaphor, is it not, and this is looking at it from what's the more apparent meaning. So we're looking at it from a slightly different angle, so there's no harm in looking at one ayah from different aspects. So, as the village, the apparent meaning is, ask the village. The actual wording shows that go speak to the village and the buildings in the village and so on. But obviously that's not the meaning. So we interpret it to mean the people of the village. Okay, we interpret it to mean the people of the village. So that's what the Shaykh says. And for the village, then it is not possible to ask it directly. And why do we go to that meaning? It doesn't make sense to go speak to the walls and so on. Now, before I talk about the second type, which is rejected, I think it's important to now mention what are the conditions of a correct form of interpretation. So here, the Shaykh has split ta'wil in interpretation into two types, acceptable and rejected. Sahih wal fasid. As for Sahih, Sheikh's given an example, and now we're going to mention when is it Sahih. Okay? When is it considered Sahih, when is it not? And what are the conditions for it to be considered Sahih? There are three conditions that the ulama mentioned. There are three conditions that the ulama mentioned. The first is that the wording can take that meaning. The wording can take that meaning. Okay. So the wording that you have. So here, most of the Qariya makes sense. So if you now it is kind of linked with the Majaz and Haqiqah, but you could argue that the hidden word is people. So it makes sense. As the people of the village, that's the hidden word. Remember we spoke about it. I don't want to go into that again. So the wording can take that meaning. I mean, I can give you another example as well. Let's take another example. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in a hadith, hadith of Anas radiallahu anhu, he said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأبو بكر وعمر, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr and Umar used to start the salah Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And we know that we don't start the salah with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Before that, there's a dua, whether it's Subhanakallah or whether it's Allahumma ba'id bayni wa bayna khataya, whatever dua it may be. So we don't start the salah with that. So many of the ulama, they have said the salah here actually means al-qira'ah. It actually means recitation. The first thing a person would recite out loud would be Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Okay. So this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr and Umar used to start the salah with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Now, let's take this meaning. So we have interpreted the salah to mean qira'ah, prayer to mean the recitation in the prayer. Can the wording take it? Yes. Okay, because the word salah, the concept of salah has all of these actions, and within salah is the recitation. So it's part of the meaning in this case. Right. The second condition, now the second condition, which I've not mentioned, I'm going to mention it now, is that there has to be a proof. There has to be a proof to show that interpretation. There has to be a proof to show that interpretation. Okay. In this example that the Shaykh has given in the book, then it goes back to the points that we mentioned in al-haqiqah al-majaz. Depending if you call it majaz, then the dalil is the majaz, and we can go into that. If you call it haqiqah and so on, and so of the Arabs, that's talked about there. But we can give maybe a more clearer answer with this other example that I've given you. So is there a proof to show that as-salah means qira'ah? Yes, we have another hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, which is a Muslim. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يفتتح الصلاة بالتكبير والقراءة بالحمد لله رب العالمين. That the Prophet ﷺ used to open the salah with the takbir, with Allahu Akbar. So yes, subhanAllah, even before the dua, Allahu Akbar was the first thing now. So she said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يفتتح الصلاة بالتكبير. The Prophet will start the salah with the takbir. That's actually the first thing. I said dua, even before the dua we say the takbir. And then she says, وَالْقِرَاءَةُ بِالْحَمْدِ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. And the recitation, i.e. start of the recitation with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So we have a dalil. In the hadith that we're talking about, or hadith of Anas, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr and Umar used to open or start the salah with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. In the hadith of Aisha, the Prophet ﷺ used to start or open the salah with the takbir and the recitation, i.e. the qira'ah, with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And the third condition for a correct form of interpretation is that there is no mani', there is no preventer. There is nothing preventing you or preventing that meaning being used. And in both of these scenarios, what the Shaykh has mentioned in the book, and also the extra example I've given you, there is no preventer preventing that meaning from being used. So this is in regards to the first type of ta'wil, the accepted type of ta'wil, and we have mentioned the 3 conditions of accepted ta'wil as-sahih. Now we move on to the second, with ta'wilun fasid. Shaykh, he says the rejected interpretation is what one does not have sound evidence to support it. The Shaykh mentions one condition, which is the main condition, that there has to be a dalil, there has to be a proof. There has to be a proof that you're taking this secondary meaning. Okay, I give the other example of the salah because I think proof is a bit more clear with another hadith, but the proof could also be Arabic language or any of the dalalat al-alfaz that we use as well. But the main thing is that there has to be a dalil, there has to be a proof that you can go to this meaning. And with the other two conditions, that the wording can support that meaning, and there's nothing preventing that meaning being used. So the Shaykh has given an example of an incorrect ta'wil, such as the interpretation of the Mu'tazila regarding the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa, the most merciful rose above the throne. They changed the meaning of istawa, rose, to the meaning of istawla, to conquer. Whereas its correct interpretation is of His Highness and establishment without asking how or making similitude. The word says istawa, Allah rose above the throne. These people, Ahlul Bid'ah, have said, no, istawa means istawla. It means Allah conquered the throne, means Allah is in charge of the throne. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that He has rose over the throne. Okay. Now the condition is not fulfilled. Firstly, the wording istawa doesn't mean istawla. The meaning istawa does not mean, in the Arabic language, it doesn't even mean that. Some Ahlul Bid'ah try to use one line of poetry. However, that line of poetry, the ulama of Lugha say that it's not found in any of the books of Lugha. It's not authentic at all. So, subhanAllah, they're leaving off all of these ayat and hadith and aqwal al-salaf, and they're trying to go to this one line of poetry, which, by the way, it's attributed to a Christian anyway. It's attributed to a Christian. And secondly, the ulama of Lugha themselves are saying that it's not found in any of our books. Where are you getting this line of poetry from? So the wording doesn't take that meaning. And secondly, what's the dalil? Which you've gone away from the apparent meaning. Okay, where's your dalil? There's no dalil. Remember we said either you see Allah or something similar, and both of these cannot happen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot see Allah in this world, nor is there anything similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or thirdly, somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy, in this case the Prophet ﷺ, informs us about this, and Allah and the Prophet ﷺ has not informed us of these details. And there are others as well, other examples of this, which I don't want to mention. I don't think it's befitting to mention some of Ahlul Bid'ah. So now, so we'll leave that for now. We'll just move on to the next chapter, inshallah, which is an-naskh. I know we're coming towards the end of the time. However, because we started 15 minutes late, I'm going to finish 15 minutes late so that my 2 hours are fully completed, inshallah. No, the main reason is so that we can finish. Subhanallah, I do want to finish on time. How long is tomorrow's lesson? Is it 3 hours or is it 2? It is. Tomorrow is 3.5 from 7 to, okay. Then it's 2 and then 2. Okay, inshallah we can finish. Right. I think I've slowed down, so let's try to go a bit faster now, inshallah. Now we're on abrogation, naskh. This is a very, very important chapter. A very, very important chapter. And naskh, abrogation. Okay. This is one of the most important chapter, and the ulama stress on this a lot. And they mention that naskh is they even mention that for a person to become mujtahid, he has to know an-nasikh wal-mansukh and so on. So it's very, very important. And subhanAllah, I had a story of a Sheikh. He mentioned that, and this is the problem, not knowing Usool al-fiqh and not studying with a teacher and just, trying to do ijtihad yourself. Where there's a person reading a hadith book and he came across a chapter. Those are hadith which command the killing of dogs. So he read the hadith and he wanted to implement the hadith. And what happened was, he got up and started killing all the dogs. He comes next day and he reads the following chapter, the ruling or the abrogation of the ruling of killing dogs. The abrogation of the rulings of killing dogs. So subhanAllah, that ruling has been abrogated. So this is something very important to know, if a ruling has been abrogated or not. Because if you do not know, then you're going to be giving a ruling on something which is abrogated, something that we don't have to act upon anymore. So let's move. What's the definition of nasakh, abrogation? I did kind of explain what it is previously. Let's take more of a technical definition. The definition, abrogation linguistically means removal of the copy. Okay. And technically it means to remove a legal ruling or its wording with another evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah. So this, in simple terms, for those that don't know what nasakh or abrogation is at all, you have a ruling, a new hadith or ayah comes, you remove the previous ruling and now you act upon the new ruling. You basically overrule the previous ruling. That's basically nasakh. Okay. So the Shaykh starts off by saying rafa', it is to remove. So nasakh is a removal of the previous ruling totally. Okay, it's not making it, giving an exception to the ruling or specifying that ruling or restricting that ruling. No, it's removal of the whole ruling in totality. And then he says, حكم دليل شرعي. Okay, so it's a ruling. You have to get first, it's a removal of a ruling. So when you say of a ruling, it means something which has already been established. So you can't turn around and say that, okay, it's not in Islam. Firstly, it wasn't obligatory to pray. Okay, and then in the 10th year, Allah made salah obligatory. That's not called nasakh. Okay, because there's no ruling before. It was just bara'at al-asliya. Bara'at al-asliya meaning it's not obligatory at all. That's not considered a ruling. The ruling would be is if it was obligatory to pray, and if Allah said it's not obligatory to pray anymore, that would be nasakh. As for it's not obligatory, and now it's obligatory, that's not called nasakh. Okay, so that's important to know. And then legal just makes it sound, I think a better word is a legislative ruling. Shar'i, legislative ruling might be a better word. So that shows that it's a ruling that has already been established from the Quran and Sunnah. From the Quran and Sunnah. A ruling which has already been established from the Quran and Sunnah. Not from Qiyas or Ijma'. Qiyas and Ijma' do not enter into here. Qiyas or Ijma' do not enter into here. Okay? Because if a new ruling was to come, it can't go against, it can't go against Qiyas. Qiyas is not considered in that scenario. And like with Ijma' came in later on. Yes, later on, ulama could agree upon that this ruling is mansukh, that this ruling has been abrogated. But in terms of the ruling itself, it can't be an established ruling by Ijma'. So we mean it's a total removal of a legislative ruling which has been established by the Quran and Sunnah. Then it says, or its wording. Now, or its wording, I don't want you to focus on that too much. We're going to talk about the different types of nasakh, and that's where this will be explained. Then he says, with another evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, or with another evidence from the Quran and Sunnah. No. It's a good definition by the author, rahimahullah. But there's one important thing which I think he should have mentioned, which you can add at the end. When he says with another evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, they add normally mutarakhin an, i.e. it has come after. With another evidence from the Quran and Sunnah which has come after it. That's important to know that otherwise if it's the other way around then it wouldn't be considered nasakh. Meaning there's a ruling that's already been established and there's another rule from the Quran and Sunnah which has come after, not same time, not before, but it's come after. It has come after. So it's not come at the same time or before, it's come after the ruling. It's come after that ruling. So that's something that ulama add on. Mutarakhin an, meaning this delete from the Quran and Sunnah has come later. It has come later. And that's what nasakh is, right? Established ruling, then a new ruling. The new ruling is going to come after. Okay. Some ulama also do talk about, here a difference between nasakh and takhsis, between abrogation and specification. When we talk about khas, the ulama do talk about khas, which is because there's a bit of overlap, right? Because you have a general ruling and you say, actually, in this scenario, this ruling does not apply. It's a bit different. So it can overlap. However, one of the main differences is that naskh is a removal of the ruling in totality. It's a removal of ruling. Removal, that's a good word. Rafa, removal of ruling. Whereas takhsis is just, specifying a part of that ruling. Specifying a part of that ruling. Or some even say it's a mani', meaning it prevents the ruling to apply to a certain scenario. It prevents the ruling or the application of a ruling on a certain scenario. That's one of the main differences. Another difference is that with naskh, there's a condition, which is what we add in the definition, that the new ruling has to come later. So naskh, the condition is it has to come later. But that's not the case when it comes to a khas, takhsis, specifying. A third difference is that naskh can only take place with the Quran and Sunnah. Naskh can only take place with the Quran and Sunnah, whereas takhsis, specifying, can take place with the Quran and Sunnah, but also by ijma' and qiyas. And then the fourth is that naskh, abrogation, does not enter into akhbar, into information and stories, unlike takhsis. So for example, if a story was to mention this happened, okay, then takhsis could take place, meaning saying, apart from this scenario, this thing happened, or a bit more clarification. But you can't do this. You can't say this happened and later on say, oh, this did not happen. That does not make sense when you are doing when you're mentioning some information or story. So for example, I went to the masjid today. I can't come along later and say I did not go to the masjid today. Okay, either I went or I didn't go. And obviously, the Quran, وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا, who is more truthful than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So naskh will not take place in akhbar, and we're going to talk about some of the things that naskh doesn't take place in, but the difference here is that naskh does not take place in akhbar, whereas takhsis can take place. Okay, so after explaining this definition, and to repeat the definition, it is to remove a legal ruling or its wording. We said we're going to get to what does it mean by its wording when we talk about the different types of naskh, with another evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, and then we added on which came after it, mutarakhin anhu. Then after that, the Shaykh, he explains the definition slightly. Okay. He explains, and then here towards the bottom, he now starts to talk about the ruling of naskh. And he says, and abrogating is acceptable, وَالنَّسْخُ جَائِزْ عَقْلًا وَوَاقِعْ شَرْعًا. And abrogating is acceptable intellectually and is a legal, shar'i, legislative reality. What this basically means is that naskh can take place aqlan, with your intellect. It makes sense. Naskh makes sense. And shar'an, Islamically, it has taken place. Now, this is something that, this is something which is the way of the Usooliyun, because the Usooliyun, they like to use the aql a lot, right? So they always mention, when they look at certain concepts, they always try to prove it through the aql and through the shara'. And the reason they do aql first is some Ahlul Bid'ah might have been affected by the belief, they give preference to the aql, to the intellect over the legislation. But even those of Ahlul Sunnah, like the Shaykh was mentioned it, it's not to give preference to the aql, but it's because the Usooliyun, they say that if it doesn't make sense, then there's no way that the Sharia could have come with it. So that's why they talk about the aql first. But it might have been better if they mention the Sharia first and then they mention, does it make sense or not? So there are two ways. So if you read what the Shaykh has said, he says, as for acceptable through reason, then it is because in Allah's hand is total power and authority, because the Lord is the owner. He may legislate whatever His wisdom and mercy necessitates for His slaves. So does the intellect prevent us from seeing that the possessor orders those He possesses however He wants. His wisdom and mercy with His servants also necessitate that He legislates for them what is in their best interest in the worldly life and the hereafter, and benefits differ from time to place. So one ruling at a certain time or state may be more beneficial for the slaves than at another time, and Allah is all-knowing and wise. Here, the Shaykh has basically mentioned two reasons why intellectually it makes sense for nasakh to take place. The firstly is Allah, in Allah's hand is total power and authority. Allah can do what He wants. If He wants to change the rulings, He can do it. If Allah wants to change the rulings, then He can do so. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates what He wills and He rules by what He wills. And we have no authority to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that. That's the first point. If Allah did change it, of course He can do what He wants. But the second is because the benefits differ from time and place. Benefits differ from time and place. Meaning there might have been benefit in a certain ruling at this time, but then in a different scenario, there's a different ruling because that's more beneficial and more befitting for that for that scenario. That is in terms of aqlan. In terms of shar'an, the Shaykh says, as for its occurrence in the Sharia, then the evidences are many. From them, another Shaykh is going to mention a few ayat which prove this. The first is ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسيها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. We do not abrogate a verse, so this is clear that in the ayah that abrogation takes place, or cause it to be forgotten. We're going to kind of explain what that means later, except that we bring forth one better than it or similar to it. So, and they've not translated the end of the ayah. ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. Do you not know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing whatever He wills, or على كل شيء قدير, upon everything He is capable. So in this ayah, the 2 points are mentioned. Firstly, that if a ruling has been abrogated, Allah comes with a similar or a better ruling, that which has more benefit for the people, or depending on the place and time. And then towards the end of the ayah, it also shows Allah can do what He wills. But this is an ayah to show that nasakh does take place. The second is the saying of Allah the Most High, Al-an khaffaf Allah ankum. Now Allah has lightened the hardship for you. فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُونَ. So now have relationships with them. This text was revealed to the change of the previous ruling. The Shaykh hasn't mentioned the whole ruling, but the second one is where initially it was not allowed for those who are fasting at night to have relationships with their spouses. Initially that wasn't allowed. And then later on Allah changed the ruling and He said, okay, at night you're allowed. So Allah says, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ. And now you can have relationship and intercourse with your spouses at the night, during the night of Ramadan. That's the second ayah. As for the first ayah, it's a bit longer. It's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the people time of Badr. Okay, it says 866, but you also need to look at the previous ayah as well. So in the previous ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't have the ayah in front of me because it's not there, but in the previous ayah, if I remember correctly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the people at the battle of Badr that each of them have to fight. 20 of them have to fight 200. A group of 20 have to fight a group of 200. And a group of 100 have to fight 1,000. Basically 10 times. 10 times that amount. So that's how it was initially. So 20, 200. 100 face 1,000. But that was a bit difficult. So Allah says, Al-an khaffaf Allah ankum. In the next ayah, now Allah has made it easier for you. And then Allah, in this ayah, carry on, He says, if you're 100, then you only have to face 200. So only not times 10, just times 2 now. 100 faced 200. And if you are 1,000, then you faced 2,000. If you are 1,000, then you faced 2,000. So as you can see, that was nasakh. And the third example, which is it's a very good example, Hadith of Prophet ﷺ, because it's clear wording of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, I used to forbid you from visiting the graves, so visit them from now on. I think the remaining of the hadith is, I don't have it, but in some narrations the remaining of the hadith, فإنها تذكركم الآخرة, because it reminds you of the hereafter. So this text abrogates the prohibition of visiting the graves. So initially it wasn't allowed to visit the graves, but then the Prophet gave permission. So that's quite straightforward. So you can clearly see that from the wording. I used to forbid you, but now I don't. So that is nasakh. The last thing which I'll take today, the conditions we'll take from tomorrow, inshallah. The last thing we'll take today is what prevents abrogation taking place. Meaning, what are those things where nasakh, abrogation, cannot take place in? Abrogation is prevented from the taking place in the following. Number one, al-akhbar, news. The first thing is news, which I kind of mentioned before. Because abrogation only deals with rulings, and abrogation of one of the two pieces of news means one of them had to be a lie. And lying is impermissible, or impossible in news that Allah and His Messenger bring. In the case where the ruling comes in form of news, then this can be abrogated, as in the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, This is a bit hard to explain in English. This is basically, it goes back to the Bab al-Amr, where the actual wording, those are not Arabic, it's fi'al mudari', it's a present verb. So it's actually information that this is happening. But the meaning is a command. The meaning is a command. That's what the Shaykh says, in the case where the ruling comes in the form of a news. So even though the wording itself is like of news, like for example, I could probably say a Muslim is the one, he prays and then he makes the adhkar after, and then he makes dua, and then he stays in the masjid to recite Quran, and then he leaves, for example. I'm saying it like that, but what I mean, okay, if I had the ability to legislate, obviously I don't want something of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but just for terms of understanding, if I would speak like that, or if the Prophet was to speak like that and say that, then that would indirectly be a command, meaning you have to go pray. Whether it's wajib or mandub, because still they both come under command, right? As we've taken, but it's like a command. Even though I've used that wording, it's actually a command to go pray and do this and then do that and do that. So that's what the Shaykh is saying. He says, in that case, maybe, but the reality is, I don't think there was a point, or there was a big need of mentioning this, because in reality, it's not news. It's a command. It's a command. Okay, so I'm just saying this because in English it might not be. Inshallah, it makes sense. Inshallah, it makes sense. So the Shaykh, he says, this is an order in a form of a news. Therefore, the abrogation came in the next verse, and it is the saying of Allah the Most High. This is the ayah that we were talking about before. Now Allah has lightened the hardship for you, and He knows that amongst you is weakness. So if there are from you 100 who are steadfast, they will overcome 200. So subhanAllah, the translation is only to there. It's not got the rest of the ayah, but you understand the point. So that's the first thing. The first thing is news. The second, the rulings that are of benefit in every time and place. The foundations of the religion, basically. Those things which are every time and place is benefit, such as Tawheed. You can't change Tawheed. There's no way you can abrogate that. The principles of faith, the pillars of Iman, worship, the morals of honesty and chastity and generosity, courage, and so on, cannot be abrogated. Likewise, the opposite. The prohibition that is evil in all age and place, like shirk and kufr, as well as bad character such as lying, immorality, greed, being a coward, etc., etc. Since the laws are for the well-being of the people and to repel evil from them. So these two things, firstly news, and those things which are a benefit in all times and places, and maybe you could say foundation of the religion and so on, there's no abrogation in those. Next point is regarding the conditions of abrogation. When can you abrogate, when can you not? And inshallah we will take that in the next lesson. We'll take that when the next lesson. Today is Thursday, next lesson is Saturday, in a couple of days. And alhamdulillah, we've decided to give you a day off in between, because the brothers realized that, especially because Usool fiqh is a bit tricky, firstly, And secondly, it's more tricky if it's the first time you're coming across it. So we've given you like a day which allows you to revise. So inshallah, we've had a few days off since I left anyway, so you should have revised the previous days. And now we've got a day off, so you have a day to revise what we've taken today. And Saturday, inshallah, we will continue. So we'll stop here, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa hamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.